Well, welcome to another instalment of Beggy TV. The focus of this presentation is about, as you can see there, understanding our educational landscape. There is so much change and expectations in schools at the moment, and what we as educators are required to do, and the challenges associated with that. This presentation is just looking to be a touchstone or a touch point at looking at what are the underpinning theories, theorists and practices that are currently informing the way we plan, engage and work with children. It's just designed to give you the background to the change that's occurring so that we can become better teachers and engage in the process. So John Hattie is the first person for us to look at. Hattie studied 6 areas that contribute to learning. He looked at the student, the home, the school, the curricula and the teacher, and of course the teaching and learning approaches that are being used. Hattie provided a list of relative effects of those different influences on student achievement, but the underlying data also told a story, and that story was about it was important to ensure that we made teaching and learning visible. So out of the meta-analysis that Hattie did, what teacher and teaching actions result in effective academic outcomes? As you can see there, there's the rank, the domain, and the influence. Look, pause if you'd like on this one, and just take your time to have a look at those if you haven't seen them before, or if you want to have a different look. These are the top 20. You'll notice the various domains of influence about student, about teaching, teacher, school, curricula. So they're all there. Interestingly, look at the top 3 or 4. The self-reporting of grades. Anything above that was greater than 0.4 in the effect size, Hattie was saying, well, this is what we can do work. Now, the self-reporting of student grades, he did say that if he did it a different way, what he'd look at is actually turn that student expectations of self. That was at 1.44. So if 0.4 was a positive effect, 1.4 was enormous. And we can develop strategies off that around positive education, about promoting growth mindset, about habits of mind, about how we structure our lessons. That is so important that can do that. Piagetian programs were 1.2. So concepts about things that are focused on logical processes instruction that look at age appropriateness of schools. And it's certainly important in our primary school areas. Micro teaching, like video teaching that we're doing right now, debriefing things, mini lessons to small groups had was similarly important. So that's just an idea. Really importantly, the greatest thing that grew out of Hattie's work were the 10 mind frames of a teacher. Now initially these were 9, but he added a really important one down towards the end. So have a think of this as you as a teacher. Our mind frame about who we are. I'm an evaluator. I'm a change agent. I'm transformational in what I'm doing. I talk about learning and not about teaching. How often do we talk about the practice and not what we want to see as the end result? I see assessment as feedback to me. So we're not assessing the kids. The assessment we deliver tells me something, informs me about how I'm going as a teacher. I engage in dialogue, not monologue, which is kind of crazy given what I'm doing here this morning in talking with you this way. I enjoy challenge. As a teacher, I enjoy challenge. I engage in positive relationships. And again, if you go back to those influence factors in terms of positive outcomes, student-teacher relationship was so important. I use the language of learning. I see learning as hard work. We're going to come to Carol Dweck's work about grit a little bit later, but I see learning as hard work. It's not easy for kids. It's hard, and we've got to challenge them and work with them and develop grit so they stick with us. And then finally, the 10th one that he added was I collaborate, in terms of us as teachers, as a group, collaborating to deliver what we can to our children. Now, from Hattie's work, I jump across to Robert Mazzano. Now, Mazzano's been working in education and education theory for a long time, as has Hattie. But there were 3 key conceptual frameworks or concepts that Mazzano has developed that have influenced education over the last 30 years. The first was Dimensions of Learning, which was established in 1988. 1992, and is actually across the US, across Australia, across Britain and other educational areas. And it's a way of teaching and learning. We'll delve into that in a moment. The New Taxonomy in 2007, and then the Art and Science of Teaching. The first place I want to go is the New Taxonomy, because that's the one that is, I suppose, most significant to us where we are right now. So much of what we were doing around a taxonomy was Bloom's. Remember, 6 levels. And those 6 levels for students and in our teaching and in the way in which we planned was remembering, understanding, applying, analysing, evaluating and creating. The taxonomy itself emerged from a series of informational discussions with colleagues that began at the American Psychological Association way back in 1948. It was intended for a narrow audience, and then it slowly grew and grew and grew because it did have traction. It did have traction in educational circumstances about what could possibly occur, what we could grow in education. Over the years, though, it was seen that there were some inherent issues with that. And what Mazzano did was look at a new taxonomy. The new taxonomy that's proposed looks that Bloom's left out 2 really important things. Firstly, the inherent complexity of various steps that are involved when we try to do something, and the level of familiarity one has with the steps. When we first learn to drive a manual car, it's complex, it's difficult. But realistically, the process of driving that manual car is simple once we've got familiarity and we understand the complexity of the steps involved. So as you can see there's still the cognitive system, which relates fairly closely to the work of Bloom. Retrieval, comprehension, analysis, and knowledge utilisation. Each of those four first levels work in with the domains of knowledge. Information and information gathering, mental procedures and processes, and psychomotor procedures. There's 3 domains of knowledge that we work in as human beings. But then he added level 5 and level 6. Level 5, the metacognitive system, and level 6, the self system. The self system is essentially saying it's the prime determiner in whether a student is motivated enough to engage with the knowledge or task. It's the first system to be engaged. If the student says, yes, I'm with you on this, then we can start moving forward. If they don't, then learning is going to be difficult. At a metacognitive level, once the student's motivated, then those children examine what they know about the given knowledge of the task and compare that to new knowledge that's coming in, how they think about their thinking and how they process that. And then, of course, the cognitive, which is that assimilation of knowledge, of task order, of increasing difficulty. And as you can see there, from retrieval through to the utilisation of knowledge. Just another idea of what it is in terms of the levels. You've got the information, the mental procedures, and the physical procedures. From that, the cognitive system develops those things. Each interacts individually across informative, mental procedure and physical procedure, and the metacognitive and the self sit above and outside it because they're the 2 that create understanding and engagement. As I said, this is just a broad discussion of what it is. If you're interested, go and have a look more or research more about it. To give you an idea, on the first slide, there was a number of verbs, and you can see a few of them there just off to the left of screen. But in Mazzano's taxonomy, the useful verbs around retrieval, comprehension, analysis, and knowledge utilisation, the types of things in assessment items that we'll be asking students to do, which suggest whether it's at level 1, level 2, level 3, or level 4. Simply, again, another diagrammatic. And then finally, the differences. So in Bloom, it was a framework of information processing. There wasn't an ability to be predictive at all. Mazzano's is actually a theory of human thought. So the self system has to be engaged for us to actually learn. And that's a predictive element. Psychomotor skills were unpublished and I suppose ignored to a point in Bloom around learning. But psychomotor procedures, as we know, the physical elements of learning and what we have to physically do to show learnings is important. That knowledge was about remembering phenomena accurately. Mazzano's suggestion, or in this new taxonomy, is that knowledge it's information retrieval, but it's also the procedures that we execute to use that knowledge. The comprehension level, objectives, behaviours and responses, as opposed to notions of translation of information, interpretation, and then extrapolation outside of what we read. Synthesis, as opposed to the utilisation of knowledge. And then the knowledge category is explored at the first cognitive level only, whereas the knowledge domain interacts with all levels of processing. The second element of Mazzano's work to be discussed is a learning and teaching instructional framework that was developed by Mazzano. It's heavily embedded in our EQ schools, which are with us. All right, it's designed to take advantage of the new taxonomy of learning, and interestingly, EQ's working with it, and our QCAA process that we're working towards now in terms of our ATAR systems and our syllabus generation is very much using the new taxonomy. There's 10 design questions that are asked when you plan a unit, and 3 lesson elements. Those lesson segments, are then developed into the 41 elements of effective teaching. Let's have a quick look at what it is. And again, if you're interested, have a deeper look. The first thing is to look at is, what are the outcomes? What are they trying to achieve? The first one is, as teachers across an entire school, a whole school approach around a common language of instruction. That as teachers, we master essential instructional routines about clarity in what we deliver and clarity in goals. Again, nice link there, and later on we'll talk about our own DELT processes and our own model of pedagogy where we're looking at learning intentions and success outcomes. Teachers acquire strategies for delivering new content. Teachers discover the importance of applying knowledge by generating and testing hypotheses. So it's not just about the knowledge, it's about how do we utilise it. Developing knowledge regarding important teacher behaviours to engage students, that self-system, engaging the self-system, and then the importance again of high expectations for all of our students, and go straight to Martin Seligman's work, which we'll talk about soon too, of positive education, positive psychology, and we have high expectations for our students and we believe in them, how that can deliver a positive intention for growth and purpose. And then finally, we come to the design questions. If you look firstly at domain 1, these are the planning elements. It's classroom strategies and behaviours. So what are we looking for inside the classroom, that common language? Take a few moments just to review that yourself. You'll see the first 9 design questions are there. The 10th design question about developing effective lessons, you'll see on the next page. It's in domain 2 about planning and preparing. But our lessons involving routine events, addressing the content, enacting on the spot, and then we go to domains 2, 3, and 4. Planning and preparing, reflecting on our teaching, and collegiality and professionalism. Think quickly back to Hattie and some of those mind frames of a teacher. I collaborate as one. And finally, another framework that was developed, and this was the first framework that Mazzano put together in that period of sort of the mid to late 80s, a framework for creating learning and lessons with a strong emphasis upon the deliberate development and use of complex reasoning processes, while also optimizing learning environment and making explicit the strategies for knowledge acquisition. So the 5 dimensions of the framework are there: positive attitudes and perceptions about learning, the acquisition and integration of knowledge, the extension and refinement of knowledge, the meaningful use of that knowledge, and then productive habits of mind. And in each of those, similar to the design questions, there's a way in which to design units and design lessons to accurately target those areas. And interestingly, as we go through, you'll see the links back. We've talked Seligman, I've mentioned Dweck. A place to go now is to that number 5 one, is productive habits of mind, and the work of Art Costa and Benita Kalick. So in Costa and Calic and that fifth dimension of habits of mind, it's starting to look at concepts of learners' dispositions. How are they thinking? And our habits of mind are those things which can engage the learner at that level 6 self-system level. Habits of mind is knowing how to behave intelligently when you don't know the answer. Having a disposition towards behaving intelligently when confronted with problems and creating ways in which to find an answer. You'll notice down the bottom there, if you're interested, you can have a look at the Art Costa Center, which gives more information about this. But let's have a quick look at what the 16 habits of mind are. So there they are. Take some time, pause on it if you'd like, and read those 16 habits of mind. I'd like you to ask yourself a question or remember a time in your life when you were successful, when you achieved something and you were quite proud about it. And then look to the 16 habits of mind and think, in my process of success, how many of these did I have to apply to the situation I was in? About persisting, about managing impulsivity. Did I have to think flexibly? Was I required in my relationships to listen with understanding and empathy? Did I have to strive for accuracy? Was there a process of questioning and problem solving as I went through the journey? So there's a large number of challenges as we go through such an item. We need to apply past knowledge to situations. So look at the 16 and gather that. Similarly, look at your failings and ask the question, were there times when I failed that because I didn't quite have established in the process the habits of mind that would allow me to be successful? One of the important points and the next researcher I want to look at is that of Carol Dweck. Now, Carol Dweck's work in growth mindset was part of a subset of research that grew from and with Martin Seligman and the positive psychology movement and the positive education movement. It's specifically about how we think about self, our self-perception or self-theory. Go back to the 16 habits of mind. If I can encourage the 16 habits of mind, am I in a better place to believe more in what I can do, to believe that I'm intelligent, to believe that I'm a good teacher, I can achieve great things? Or in a student's perspective, I do have the ability, if I work hard, to achieve my dreams, to achieve the goals I set myself. So down the bottom there, as a definition, in a fixed mindset, people believe their basic qualities, like their intelligence or talents, are simply fixed traits. Therefore, they spend their time documenting their intelligence or talent instead of developing them. They also believe that talent alone creates success without any effort. As older people, we know that's not true. You could list 15 times in your life where effort delivered you success. Sure, people might have done it better than you, but success was there and it was evident and you're proud of yourself, and maybe you challenge that thought of I can't. And this is, of course, something that many people have seen. But the areas that we're talking about down that left-hand side, about the desire, about the evaluation of situations, about being smart or dumb, about succeeding, thinking about growth and challenge instead, dealing with setbacks, challenges, effort that's required. Well, why bother? I can't do it anyway. But it's no. With effort comes reward. And part of the reward is the effort that goes in. Criticism, the success of others, and then the result. So we move to our second to last theorist, Martin Seligman. Martin Seligman's work at the level of the psychology of the individual, adult and child, has been fundamentally changing or shaping the nature of how schools work for many years now. Geelong Grammar, of course, has got a large program in the area of positive psychology and positive education. So what is it? Again, it's about self-system thinking, that highest level. So it interacts seamlessly with both the core elements of visible learning and the processes and attitudes that encourage in the development of habits of mind in student development. Additionally, it creates an opportunity to build the fundamental foundations in students to reach that level 6 functionality. There's 5 core elements of focus in all aspects of teacher-adult interaction and the like. What we're talking about when we're guiding students and when we're talking to students is we want to talk about PERMA. In positive education, we're talking about PERMA. And PERMA is these 5 elements that Seligman had found is essential to human well-being. You might take a side thought as you're reading these and think about what does a religious dimension add to people's lives as well. Because I've got a theory that the religious element of someone's life, and we are in a Brisbane Catholic Education School setting, the religious element of our life, when nourished, can deliver these same things. But Seligman, of course, is talking to a secular world. So these are the 5 elements that Seligman found essential. That if we have positive engagement, we create positive emotion, we have positive relationships, we have positive meaning, and there's positive accomplishment in our lives, then we can find our happiness. And in finding our happiness, we can move toward success. So let's translate that to our education focus. So positive education looks to develop positive outlook across student purpose. Why am I coming to school? Student relationships with each other and with their teachers and with their schools. The idea of positive emotion and positive emotional relationships, positive emotional outlook that develops positive health, that we create environments that allow for positive engagement of students, so broad activities, broad curriculums, within reason obviously, but that allow for engagement of every student on every level, and that we reward and encourage accomplishments. We don't give feedback for feedback's sake. We don't praise the uncontrollables. We deliver positive accomplishment messages around things that students have actually worked hard to achieve. We praise the effort to deliver positive accomplishment in a positive education setting. So reflect on those for a while, and again, there's a link there that you can use to make your way if you're interested more in positive psychology and the work of Martin Seligman. So we've gone through John Hattie, Marzano, touched a little bit on Bloom, talked about Carol Dweck, and now looked at Seligman. And finally, it's pushing towards or looking at our BCE perspective, that work of Lynn Sharrett and Michael Fullan about putting faces on the data and about delivering excellence in learning and teaching in every classroom. Again, you'll be familiar, but it's worth looking at. Sharrett and Fullan have suggested about 14 parameters or key drivers to create schools where high student performance is expected and delivered. The work, of course, came out of Canada and I think Great Britain as well. The 14 parameters are there. Shared beliefs, embedded literacy instructional coaches, daily sustained focus on literacy instruction, principal leadership, early and ongoing intervention, a case management approach, things like your data walls, your review and response, professional learning at school staff meetings, making staff meetings learning environments for lifelong learning to encourage that in us, school grade and subject meetings, centralised resources, a commitment from budget to literacy development, and we've certainly seen that, action research and collaborative inquiry to get our answers to the problems, parental and community involvement, cross-curricular connectedness, and shared responsibility and accountability. What developed then as part of a process that we're working on is that concept of we teach, we believe, we learn. The learning and teaching framework within Brisbane Catholic Education. But I want to move to the high yield strategies first that are in front of you, that are suggested as being key in the growth of excellent learning and teaching. The first is really about the leaders in schools, the principals, the deputy principals, the AP curriculums, the APREs, learning walks and talks. I draw your attention to the 5 questions for learners, which we know pretty well. We've talked about it. What are you learning? How are you going? How do you know? How can you improve? Where do you go for help? Talking to the learners, engaging the learners in, are you on song with us? Have you engaged? What we need to spend more time on is that reflective element. 5 questions for teachers. What are you teaching? Why are you teaching it? How are you teaching it? How can you improve? And where do you go for help? We're so busy in what we're doing, we so often skip the reflective element of our practice. That's so important, both in Sharaton Fullan's model, but also we go all the way back to the mind frames of a teacher and being reflective. The second area of those high yield strategies is the review and response meeting, and you can see the purpose there, to provide teachers with a collaborative and supportive opportunity environment to review student data, to evaluate the impact of teaching and plan to progress learning, to evaluate the impact of teaching. Remember, we're talking about, again, the mind frames of a teacher. Assessment is feedback to me on how I'm going. Review and response, so incredibly important. Again, take your time to have a look at that review and response process. And then the third of the high yield strategies, which is the most visible about making learning visible for us, is the data walls and managing our data. Who, when, why, considerations, purpose and audience. How collaborative is this process? Remembering our confidentiality and making sure that we can interpret it easily. Again, take your time to pause on this one, to have a look and to read about our data walls, about truly putting faces on the data, so that we can start planning for how do we work with these students to move them forward. That idea of it being a conversation starter. Where are the kids now? Where are they going? What this has all come out of has, of course, been the models of pedagogy. If for a moment we look at this and we think of all the elements of what we've spoken of today, this model of pedagogy delivers to us as teachers a way in which to access all of those theories and theorists and make them living in our classroom. We evaluate the impact of our teaching. We focus on learners and their learning. It's about the individual. We establish clear learning intentions and success criteria. Where are we going? What are we doing it for? Making sure that there's clarity in our teaching, as well as in our feedback, which of course comes shortly in respond. To activate multiple opportunities, to look at our learners and say, how can this happen? To establish those positive classroom environments. And then to respond with feedback that moves learning forward. Feedback that's specific and directed and makes kids work toward the next level, as opposed to feedback that's just made to give them a bit of a cuddle. Sometimes kids need that. Sometimes their psyche needs that. But in a learning context, we've also got to make sure that we are always giving different levels of feedback that explicitly teach the kids how to move ahead. And then there's the broad context of what we're doing in our schools. Know thy impact of what we do as teacher. The model of pedagogy around the outside. What are our learning steps? What informs our planning? What are you learning about and how are you going? How do you know you're doing that? What do you do when you get stuck? Our 5 questions for kids. The next level we move out to then is our mind frames, which we spoke about earlier. Our learning dispositions, which were encouraged in the work of Mazzano. They're encouraged in the work of Kallick and Costa. They're encouraged in the work of Carol Dweck. Feedback that moves learning forward and being clear in our teaching and what we're trying to do to create that one language of learning across a school that was mentioned as the outcomes of the art and science of teaching that Mazzano was using. And what allows us to keep us on track in each of these areas and make sure the student is at the center of learning is the high yield strategies. We want to be able to focus on the learner. What are the unique attributes of each learner? How do we increase the cognitive levels of all? How do we engage the self system? How do we engage the metacognitive system? Do we identify progress? Do we ensure we've got an approved curriculum we're working towards? And do we challenge the learner's level of thinking? So in essence, that's an update on where we are with the theories and theorists of learning. It's the landscape that we are currently working in. It is complex. There's depth to it. I'd encourage you to look and to research further, because in doing that, we make this wonderful job we do as teachers so valuable. And we move from just being professional educators to being people who value our vocation and value the beautiful people in front of us. I thank you for spending the time to sit through and listen to this, and I hope it's valuable.